Gamers. Today, countless of the industry's most seminal video games were produced by dozens, often hundreds of developers. These teams are typically replete with animators, artists, designers, programmers, and other integral members, all working in tandem to guarantee a product reaches the market as planned. 60 developers were responsible for Batman: Arkham Asylum. Roughly 450 Ubisoft personnel took part in Assassin's Creed 2 production, and a whopping 2,000 people contributed to Red Dead Redemption 2. Sometimes, though, making a splash in the gaming industry doesn't necessitate an extensive amount of manpower, considering a group of only 8 made Portal. A Cinderella story of sorts, Portal is the brainchild of 7 students who happened to produce a demo quirky and ambitious enough to pique Valve's interest. The central conceit behind the series involves navigating obstacles with the skillful positioning of portals. Yet, so much more depth pervades every facet of these games, from the intricate physics that power the myriad puzzles to the compelling antagonist whose antics quickly became iconic. As the story goes, such incredible feats of game design may not have come to fruition had the original game's small development team been given access to an abundance of resources. Less is more seems to be the mantra that pervades Portal and its ensuing success throughout, which also reveals itself in the sterile but eye-catching art design, its minimal use of animated characters, and the carefully scripted narrative that runs throughout. This is the history of Portal. Before Portal, there was Narbacular Drop, an environmental puzzle game that employed portal placement as its primary gameplay mechanic. A group of 7 aspiring developers known as Nuclear Monkey Software produced the title, powering it with a proprietary game engine in an 8-month time span. Interestingly, such devotion came from neither a seasoned development team nor industry professionals. Rather, graduating seniors at DigiPen Institute of Technology in Redmond, Washington built what became the precursor to a groundbreaking Valve IP. During the summer of 2004, the students who made up Nuclear Monkey Software workshopped ideas for their final school project. Programmer Dave Kircher suggested a hide-and-seek theme. One example of Kircher's idea would have seen players start in an open field, with an outhouse in the distance to entice them forward. Upon entering said outhouse, players would step into an aircraft hangar. A box would then be found inside the hangar leading to a warehouse, thus creating a sequence of spaces inside of spaces. The rest of the team thought a screen flash should separate each transition to a new space. Kircher, however, insisted the transitions work seamlessly. No loading, no flash, just an uninterrupted shift that flowed into a fully rendered environment once the door opened. According to a Eurogamer retrospective, the development of this ambitious technology begat what we now know as the Portal mechanic. Eventually, the hide-and-seek theme landed on the cutting room floor in favor of a Portal-centric puzzle game. By 2005, Nuclear Monkey Software had a playable and complete demo in Narbacular Drop. Designer Kim Swift, who went on to serve as Portal's lead designer and project lead, told Planet Half-Life that Narbacular Drop was simply a 15-minute project meant to represent their last major assignment and flesh out each team member's portfolio. On the surface, this much seemed evident in the final product. The game's very brown art design left much to be desired. So, too, did the clunky and glitchy gameplay. Apparently, the puzzles weren't high quality either. Narbacular Drop's premise also featured little in the way of sophistication, its plot revolving around a princess who used magical portals to escape from a trap-filled dungeon. To top it all off, the princess was dubbed No Knees, named so because the player character had no ability to jump. Regardless, the student project exhibited something special that caught the eye of a wandering Valve employee, a fortuitous occurrence which secured the DigiPen seniors the opportunity of a lifetime.
You're doing very well.
DigiPen hosts a career fair for graduating students every year. Local developers are invited to play games and offer career advice. Valve's Robin Walker, whose credits include Team Fortress Classic and Half-Life 2, attended the career fair in 2005. After seeing Narbacular Drop in action, Walker provided the team with a few notes of feedback. The most valuable advice Walker imparted concerned the game's poorly implemented fail state. Narbacular Drop boasted a reset button that players could utilize at leisure once they botched a challenge. To Walker, a more carefully designed version of the game required no such option. Either players shouldn't get stuck, or in the event that they do, they should be alerted to as much. Forcing a player to discover failure on their own would only anger them, he noted. In addition to expressing his thoughts, Walker shared his contact details with the small team, telling them to get in touch should anyone have further questions. With GDC's student showcase on the horizon, the students reached out via email. They received a response unlike anything they could have anticipated. While Walker admitted he could offer no additional insight, he put forth an even grander opportunity: an invitation to demo Narbacular Drop at Valve. Less than a month later, Nuclear Monkey Software visited the studio's headquarters in Bellevue, Washington, showing the puzzle game to a group of approximately 10 Valve developers, including Walker, Eric Wolpaw, who later joined the Portal crew as a writer, and studio co-founder and president Gabe Newell. After roughly 15 minutes, Newell suspended the presentation. He then asked the students about their post-graduation plans. By the time the visit came to an end, the studio president had offered the group a chance to develop their game at Valve. Though some members had previously accepted jobs elsewhere, all 7 joined the company 3 months later. Speaking with the Seattle Times ahead of Portal 2's launch in 2011, Newell divulged that what impressed him most about Narbacular Drop was the innovative way in which physics interacted with the changed world geometry. The team's handling of challenging physics and gameplay difficulties proved equally awe-inspiring, and it usually takes years of collaboration to generate the level of camaraderie needed to conceive something so unique. Newell's appreciation of the magic the students made together, along with realizing they'd split up after graduation, stimulated his decision to invite them to finish their game at his studio. Ultimately, Valve was the lucky one, Newell argued, considering the brains behind Narbacular Drop delivered an experience the company would have otherwise never explored. Because DigiPen owned the rights to Narbacular Drop, the developers couldn't pick up where they left off upon joining Valve, and were forced to start from scratch. However, retaining the Portal mechanic was a must. From the beginning of Portal's production, the group also took stock of lessons learned from their previous venture. The HUD had to be clean, for instance, and they began devising a way to train players. Failing to accomplish this in Narbacular Drop resulted in players feeling discouraged from progressing forward. Incorporating many of these facets demanded Herculean efforts. Though the basic control scheme remained in place, the physics behind the Portal mechanic required an overhaul, due in no small part to the shift to the source engine. Thanks to their DigiPen teachings, the Portal developers had little trouble calculating the math. Still, complications arose in implementing dynamic physics into the source engine, which wasn't accustomed to holes randomly being punched through walls. Another challenge consisted of ensuring the player and other objects could seamlessly pass between portals. In a 2008 post-mortem on Gama Sutra, the team divulged that overcoming such a distinct hurdle necessitated the development of a more robust method for rendering portals. All in all, these efforts culminated in the group programming their own portal system. Within their first week at Valve, the new hires built and playtested Portal's tutorial level, which Swift described in the Planet Half-Life interview as deliberately designed. The tutorial section began with the player character, Chell, locked in a cage, only a toilet in close proximity. This allowed players to familiarize themselves with their surroundings. Better yet, the introductory sequence effortlessly demonstrated the use of portals. In entering the portal inside their cage, players saw themselves step out of the other. It set expectations, specifically about spatial awareness, to ensure players knew Chell couldn't travel across different dimensions. Valve's insistence on playtesting proved integral to the level's overall success. During their talk at GDC in 2008, Tim Swift and Eric Wolpaw spoke extensively about the significance of playtesting early and often. With regards to the tutorial, Swift explained the level initially housed a brown and gray room with a force field in the corner, serving as the player's cage. Playtesting in the first week demonstrated how the force field mostly confused testers, leaving them to cluelessly wander around. The developers consequently placed a glass cage in its stead. Similarly, playtesting influenced revisions to Portal's art design. In the tutorial section's final build, for example, the drab room boasted a sterile white appearance. Excess details that weren't beneficial to the player were cast aside as well. The only thing Portal needed was an entertaining narrative, since testing indicated the experience grew stale after 15 to 30 minutes. As a result, in addition to receiving guidance from several other Valve team members, Wolpaw entered the mix partway through production. Prior to his work on the script, the team sat down with the writer to outline Portal's various narrative constraints. The use of Half-Life 2 art assets represented one such limitation, though said restrictions became a boon, as it was decided that Portal's story would somehow connect to the world of Half-Life.
For your own safety, do not destroy vital testing apparatus.
After his meeting with the Portal crew, Wolpaw spent a week crafting sample dialogue. Given his background in comedy, particularly his contributions to Psychonauts, Wolpaw's early writings for Portal were comedic, consisting of announcements that played over the tutorial room's relaxation vault. He recorded the messages with a text-to-speech program, making the dialogue's funny and sinister tone all the more compelling. The team's enthusiasm encouraged him to script voiceovers for the other test chambers. At this point, though, Wolpaw continued conceptualizing what the actual narrative would entail, but the epiphany would emerge soon enough. Wolpaw's in-game announcements were an instant success with playtesters, who finally felt as if they had incentive to advance through the levels. In addition, they'd become attached to the soothing yet menacing computer guide. Thus, Portal's premise assumed the form of an AI, shepherding players through increasingly complex test chambers to evaluate the performance of a portal gun. The rest of the narrative fell into place from there. Narbacular Drop's tale of a princess escaping a dungeon evolved into that of a woman escaping a testing facility. The crew's borrowing of art assets wasn't the only evidence of its limited resources. Constraints also manifested in the lack of NPCs, which would have proven difficult to develop with only 3 artists, 4 programmers, and a writer. However, restrictions of this nature forced the group to rely upon sheer creativity. Perhaps GLaDOS wouldn't have been a disembodied voice if a number of animators were available to formulate a full figure. In this case, and others, these perceived weaknesses would come to be some of Portal's greatest strengths.
Nice job breaking it, hero.
Even though Chell and GLaDOS heightened the experience in their own right, both only originated by happenstance. Chell was designed as a woman because Gabe Newell suggested a female lead during the brainstorming phase. Meanwhile, Ellen McLean assumed the role of GLaDOS because Valve needed a performer capable of executing the narrative's heavy lifting. McLean just so happened to perfectly convey the character's now iconic nuances. Fully developing the two leads demanded varying degrees of effort. With Chell, the developers merely needed to concern themselves with character design. Valve styled her body structure and face after Alicia Glidewell, a model from a local modeling agency. On the other hand, GLaDOS necessitated more attention to detail. She provided the lens through which much of Portal's narrative was told, after all. In a 2017 interview with PC Gamer, Robin Walker revealed that GLaDOS entered the picture roughly 1 year into development. At the time, players simply moved from puzzle to puzzle in the then 14 completed levels. Barring the escalating difficulty of each test chamber, players garnered no real sense of progression or reward. A threat was necessary, along with added pressure, a villain players could strive to defeat. Speaking with Rock Paper Shotgun in 2007, Wolpaw said the goal was to avoid creating an overused villain archetype. His intentions culminated in an institutional voice with sweet and supportive tendencies, who could believably revert to cruel intimidation tactics. GLaDOS wasn't solely responsible for her unhealthy relationship with Chell, however. Wolpaw hoped players would finish Portal and realize they put GLaDOS through the ringer emotionally.
That has got to be the dumbest thing that— Whoa.
Despite the compelling premise and unique gameplay loop, Portal didn't seem an easy sell in terms of marketing. Luckily, the Orange Box's 2007 release on PC, PS3, and Xbox 360 solved Portal's most significant challenge, marketing what essentially amounted to an experiment. 4 other highly anticipated projects were bundled in the Orange Box, including Half-Life 2, its standalone expansions, and Team Fortress 2. The known quantities may have lured players in, but Portal appealed to the masses on its own merit after the fact. The puzzle game's allure was notably evident in its critical acclaim. Across the board, critics praised both the narrative and Portal mechanic. Some even went as far as to call the writing some of the best in gaming. And though its short length warranted a few knocks here and there, Portal's overwhelming and unexpected success knew no bounds. Several Game of the Year prizes were awarded to Valve's newest IP, which also earned separate honors for its soundtrack, writing, and character work on GLaDOS. Little did anyone know, the best was yet to come. Many believed Portal didn't need a sequel. After all, the seemingly self-contained narrative boasted a satisfactory conclusion. The general consensus was that something so masterfully executed could not possibly receive an equally well-developed follow-up. Still, a small group of 8 produced the original, leaving 150-plus Valve personnel out of the loop, dozens of whom were eager to partake in the franchise's future projects. In a GDC 2012 talk, Eric Wolpaw explained that shortly after the Orange Box shipped, Valve spent approximately 4 months split into groups of 3 to 4 people, each crafting design experiments. A fair few seemed perfect for Portal. With this in mind, alongside the eagerness of numerous Valve employees, Gabe Newell suggested there was a lot of opportunity for a sequel. Consequently, according to Portal 2 project lead Josh Weir, a group of 4 or so developers instantly assembled to toy around with gameplay mechanics. Not too long thereafter, Wolpaw joined as lead writer. Though the crew remained at minimum capacity for a while, its peak saw a total of 60 developers jump on board, eclipsing the size of Portal's team several times over. Surprisingly, the road to expanding the project did not always involve the quintessential elements of a Portal experience. In fact, Portal 2's original version lacked a number of the then nascent franchise's most recognizable aspects.
Substitute core. Are you ready to start?
Wolpaw noted in the GDC 2012 discussion that Aperture Science's return was non-negotiable. It served as the basic foundation upon which Portal had been built, he argued. Therefore, unlimited potential rested within the funhouse of scientific achievement. Not every staple of the original title made it to the first draft of Portal 2's design, however. Chell, GLaDOS, and the Portal mechanic itself were initially left behind. The developers abandoned Portals in favor of FStop, a brand new mechanic derived from their design experiments. At GDC, Wolpaw showed a screenshot but unveiled no explicit details about the element's function, since Valve thought the mechanic might one day return. In December of 2019, however, indie studio Lunch House Software received Valve's permission to share a 90-second clip of FStop in action. The brief video depicted gameplay that revolved around a character from the first-person perspective, taking photos with an in-game camera. Each of the pictures were then used to move an object from one area to another. A canceled prequel, FStop, or Aperture Camera as it was internally known, would have taken place in the 1980s, 20 years before Portal's events. Valve intended the narrative to center on a new era of Aperture plagued by a robot uprising. Cave Johnson, who appears in Portal 2 and is voiced by J.K. Simmons, was first written to be a Southern billionaire and FStop's main antagonist. Meanwhile, GLaDOS's only FStop appearance would have been that of a cameo, as the gyroscopic liability absolver and disk operating system called Betty. Whenever Cave finished describing a test, Betty was to quickly rattle off legal jargon to absolve Aperture of liability should a test subject sustain injuries. For 3 months, developers enjoyed FStop's progress, yet playtests indicated something else in terms of the project's direction. While FStop was indeed a lot of things, it was not Portal 2, Wolpaw said of the feedback gathered from playtesters. Valve canceled FStop as a result, and Chell, GLaDOS, and Portals were reintegrated.
That's it.
After reintroducing Portals, the team elected to resurrect a handful of ideas that were axed in 2007's Portal, such as hard light bridges and excursion funnels. Paint eased its way into the project as well, courtesy of another group's efforts. Similar to the Narbacular Drop crew, the paint element was developed by DigiPen students, who Valve hired because of their work on Tag, The Power of Paint. After helping ship Left 4 Dead and its sequel, the developers started experimenting on paint with Portals. The Portal 2 team's desire to change surface properties without overcomplicating base mechanics meant the Tag creators were welcomed aboard with open arms. Reinstating GLaDOS proved more complex. She had to evolve above all else, given that players would likely find the experience unpleasant if she remained cruel throughout the sequel's duration. To solve this conundrum, Wolpaw and co-writer Jay Pinkerton wrote an arc for GLaDOS that saw the AI wrestle with fresh emotional stressors, namely Wheatley and her entrapment inside of a potato. Wheatley was introduced to represent an intriguing new companion. freshen up training, and establish Portal 2's story and comedic tone. The personality sphere's role adapted throughout various production difficulties, as Valve first designed him as an easily stolen prototype sphere that could be carried and dropped at leisure. Problems arose with the assumption that players might leave Wheatley behind. Gating the players served as one solution, whereby doors would appear at regular intervals for Wheatley to hack. But as production went on, the time he spent relying on the player for navigation reduced drastically. Early in development, while GLaDOS was still the sequel's main antagonist, Wheatley's arc ended with GLaDOS crushing him once she woke up, a perfect display of her menacing qualities. Yet playtesters weren't thrilled. They missed the kindly robot. But by establishing Wheatley's impermanent death at the clutches of GLaDOS, the writers realized he'd make for a fascinating villain during the game's second half. His promotion naturally entailed the dethroning of GLaDOS. Wolpaw and Pinkerton figured the most humiliating thing would be for Wheatley to imprison her in a shriveled potato.
Oh, that felt really good.
Suffice it to say, the pressure was on throughout development. During PAX Prime in 2010, Valve's project manager Eric Johnson told MSNBC that despite pressure from critics and fans alike, the developers felt confident in their ability to rise to the occasion. And rise to the occasion they did with great success. Following a series of hints with Portal updates, an alternate reality game, and a new ending, Valve announced Portal 2 alongside a Game Informer cover reveal in March of 2010. To the surprise of many, the studio also unveiled a co-op mode, inspired by developers who spoke of playing the first title with friends and family. While a competitive mode was once in the works, taking on the form of a Portal and Speedball combo, the overly chaotic gameplay resulted in it getting axed early on. Initially planned for a holiday 2010 release, Portal 2 underwent a couple of delays before launching in spring 2011. Arguably the most shocking occurrence during the year-long wait for its release was Newell's appearance on Sony's E3 stage, wherein he confirmed a PS3 version and crossplay with Steam. His previous comments calling PS3 and its cell processor a waste of everybody's time seemed to have no long-term effect on Valve's relationship with the hardware manufacturer. It's a good thing, too, because Portal 2 would prove worthy of everyone's attention.
Power up complete.
Upon its April 2011 release, critics showered the sequel with praise. The overwhelmingly positive reception secured it a place among the highest-rated games of all time. By and large, Valve earned applause for not simply replicating what made the first entry so successful. A closer look behind the curtain at Aperture and its remnants from the 1950s also drew a considerable amount of acclaim. Most also agreed that Portal's second outing was made all the more enjoyable by the sharp comedy writing from Wolpaw, Pinkerton, and Chet Falasek, the latter of whom primarily contributed to the co-op campaign, and increasingly challenging puzzles afforded players an unprecedented level of satisfaction upon completion. The sequel did stumble in places, though, failing to achieve all of its predecessor's triumphs. For one, some reviewers felt the twisted humor of Portal 2 disrupted its elegant link to the Half-Life universe. Excessive and lengthy load times hampered the flow of things, too. In the end, hardly anyone would argue the sacrifices weren't worth it. But user reviews of the PC version at launch were another matter entirely. A host of unhappy customers bombarded the user score on Metacritic with negative ratings, most of which were grievances against overpriced Day 1 DLC and concerns that the PC iteration was a mere console port. Ultimately, such grievances had little effect on the perception of Portal 2 overall. By May of 2012, the sequel had topped 4 million units sold across all platforms, raising lifetime sales of the series to 8 million. Portal's follow-up additionally fared well during awards season, notably taking home 3 trophies from the 2012 BAFTAs. The success of Portal can't be measured in sales and awards alone. Its cultural relevance also lies in cake memes derived from an inside joke at Valve, affections for companion cubes, and a generation of gamers who grew to appreciate the depth of interactive storytelling and the complexities of puzzle solving. Is there anything left to explore in the world of Portal, even after Chell's victory over GLaDOS? Beyond the mods and engineering simulations? And what of the tale it weaves about humanity, about survival? In the end, all good things must come to an end. Yet here's to hoping the heart of a franchise conceived by a handful of ambitious students will someday beat again. Thank you for watching. We'd like to take this time to thank, by name, the generous patrons who have pledged to our Hall of Fame reward tier. Maktoum Saeed Al Maktoum, Paul Cousineau, and those currently subscribed to our producer reward tier. Darirap Sigurdsson, EmuMovies.com, Lame Game Man, Milkshake, Schizo Lingvo. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to our channel and backing us on Patreon.